welcome to We Never Met, the podcast where I have interesting strangers on every single week. Now virtually joining me today. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
My name is Julia Nusbaum.
And what are you, I guess, known for, Julia?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're good.
I am the founder of HerStry literary magazine and writing community.
Yes. And I guess can you give people a little background on what HerStry is and how you came to develop the website and like the literary magazine?
Yeah. So HerStry is, our basic mission is empowering women through storytelling. And our goal is to sort of write women back into history, because a lot of the history books kind of leave out women's stories. And so we want to tell everyday women's stories. And the idea for it came out of the thesis that I did in grad school. And then I just kind of kept going with it. I created a blog and begged some friends to write for me. And then it kind of took off after that. And now we have we've moved from blog to literary magazine, and then also kind of created a writing community around that as well. And I teach writing courses and do some editing work for people, and have like online critique groups for women who want to get better at writing. But our ultimate goal and mission is to tell women's stories, which is what we have on the website weekly.
Yeah, it's like one thing, but there's so many things that you do. Even just like looking at the website, it's like, well, it's like, I don't know how you do because it's primarily, is it just you and a couple other people? It's
just me. And then I have one other employee who works for me part-time and does social media for me and helps with editing and accepting of submissions. And then one person who writes her own column for the magazine. But other than that, it is just me doing everything.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So what were you doing before all of this?
A lot of different things. When I moved to Milwaukee, so I moved from Milwaukee to Nashville, I moved from Nashville to Milwaukee after I finished graduate school. And I was actually still working for the company that I'd been working for in Nashville. I was working for the United Methodist Church headquarters as their event planner and doing their national and international youth events. So I did I worked from home and kind of did a lot of different stuff for them. And I've always done some freelance writing. And so just kind of, I don't know, my career is kind of all over the place.
Yeah. Did you like grow up writing a lot, or was that something you always liked, or was it sort of just like a thing you did on the side for fun? Yeah,
I grew up reading a lot. I read a ton. And I feel like that sort of filtered into my love of writing. I was very dyslexic as a kid. And so I was always told that I wasn't a very good writer because I spelled everything wrong. Yeah. Teachers would say, "Oh, you're not a good writer because you can't spell." And I mean, let me tell you a secret: no one can spell. I've seen a lot of people's work over the years, but so I didn't really get confident and get into writing probably until college. But I was always a really big reader.
What changed for you, like going to college? I mean, like hearing all that negative stuff about something that you probably like to do sucks, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think if I hadn't heard all that negative stuff, I probably would have studied like English or something in college. I ended up studying history and religion. But something just kind of clicked inside of me. And suddenly I got to college and I was in all these classes that I was actually really good at, and was told multiple times that I was a good writer by teachers who I wrote papers for. So I did kind of a like complete turnaround in all of that work. So I don't know what really changed. It's just like I flipped some kind of switch between like high school and college.
Yeah, I had a 6th grade teacher tell me once, because I was a terrible speller, and she was like, "Yeah, you know what? That's what spell check is for. Don't worry about it."
Yeah, I wish someone would have told me that, because no one did. They just all kept telling me that, "Oh, you have to learn to spell or you're not going to make it in the world." And I really thought that was going to be true, and it's just not.
It's such a small portion of like life, spelling something correctly is such an insignificant thing. Like, especially now.
Yeah, it truly is. And yeah, I mean, thank goodness for Google and spell check, but still, like, it makes no difference if I can spell a word, if I can put those words together.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I still remember in I think it was elementary school, I was writing a paper and I was like trying to figure out how to spell of, and I like it took so long to like think about how to spell it because it sounded so differently.
yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah. And that's the thing. I would always spell things kind of phonetically, like how they sound. And I still say, why don't we just spell it like it sounds?
yeah, put a V in there or a U
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so so then you went to get your master's degree. Where are you? You're not from Milwaukee, right? Are you from Rockford?
I'm from Dixon, which is like 45 minutes to an hour outside of Rockford.
Okay.
It's near DeKalb, which is where NIU is, Northern Illinois University.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm from that area. I grew up on a farm.
Oh, how was that? Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I did. There are times when I'm just like, when I'm in Milwaukee and just think, oh, I miss all the space.
Are they still doing that? Like, are they full-time farmers? Is that what they do?
No, not anymore. My dad retired, and so they are just kind of living the retired life now.
What kind of farm was it?
It was a corn and soybean farm.
Gotcha.
Kind of the quintessential Illinois farmer. So.
Yeah. So I guess when you were growing up, even with all that stuff, what were you like reading? What was inspiring you to like just pick up a book?
Yeah. Well, so my mom read with us all the time. She read out loud to us when we were kids. And I still have really good memories of sitting in bed at night and my mom would read books to us. And we would do that up through, I still remember her like reading books to me in high school, but I still to this day claim Anne of Green Gables as my very favorite book and either listen to it on audiobook or read it once a year. But I had a lot of different books that I was reading. I read a lot of the classics in high school. So like Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice and Wuthering Heights and all of those. And then I started kind of picking up literary fiction. And that's kind of been the genre where I've stayed, like contemporary literary fiction. I don't read a ton of historical fiction. And I don't really I read some like mystery or suspense or whatever, but mostly it's just literary fiction, which is just basically a way of saying everyday stories about everyday people.
Yeah. Is that what sort of got you in the mindset for what you do now, you think?
Kind of. And I think also because I studied history in college and I've always loved history my entire life. And history is basically just one big story, especially when you study it in depth. It's not the same like memorizing facts as it is in school. It's, you're sussing out these stories and the things behind these stories and what happened. And I liked learning those things. And I liked learning like an individual story of a person who lived during a specific time period, like what was happening to them, how they were experiencing whatever it was. And so that really got me, I think, interested in my mind kind of turning towards like, what are everyday women's stories like? We're living through this period in time. What are we experiencing? How are we experiencing it? And in the magazine, I have monthly themes and, I usually have the community kind of not vote on themes, but kind of give me ideas for stuff. But everything, I think, was last month our theme was women at work. And so it was themes of women in the workplace. What are they experiencing in the workplace? And the stories were completely different things, but everyone was experiencing something at work. And so that's kind of what I got interested in is like the nitty gritty of how we experience everyday life. And I think I picked that up through studying history.
Yeah, it is interesting to like sort of look back even from like in a public school setting of like learning about history and stuff. Cause yeah, it's interesting. You have to be so famous as a woman or a minority to even get mentioned in any sort of story. And it might not even be correct. Yeah.
One of the tags on our website, one of the things that we say is unless she did something really incredible or really, really bad, women aren't often mentioned in history. And so we want to write those stories back into history. And part of that, what got me interested in that in college, I took a really specific class of like think it was women in Europe from like 1700 to 1800 or something. Like it was a very specific time period. And we really like dove deep onto these everyday women and like what they were doing and how their lives were shaped by like the culture and the things that were happening in Europe at that time. And so I like to look at like how women's lives are shaped by what is happening today, and by the things they're experiencing.
Yeah. I was interested to hear if like there were specific stories that like even caught you off guard. Like, do you receive like submissions from people that are like, whoa, I didn't even realize that was a thing?
Yeah, there have been lots of different stories and like, just, I'm trying to think of one now that I have been like amazed by or something. Our stories can all be very different, but somehow we all have a very common thread weaving through it as women, and we experience the world in a similar way, even though our lives are completely different lives. And that really, we did motherhood as the May theme this year, which I guess was a little on the nose, but also I wanted to hear women's stories about motherhood. And that was probably the most submissions we've ever gotten in the history of this, the history of me doing this. And just the amount of women who had something to say about motherhood, and no story was alike. There were women who just loved being mothers. There were women who wanted something more than motherhood and didn't know how to express it. There were women who loved being pregnant. There were women who thought pregnancy was the worst thing in the world. So it's just the way that we can kind of like experience that universal thing, but all experience it differently, is what I love about the website and the stories that we put on there. It's this thing that happens to so many women, but it's experienced in a different way for everybody.
Yeah, because you had a child recently, correct?
I did. I had a baby in March.
Yeah. So, sort of like having a baby in March and then like seeing all these stories, did it like give you some, I guess for me, I would feel like it would give me some sort of comfort knowing that there are so many different perspectives on how this goes.
It did. And it was funny because when I put the themes together for 2020, I didn't know that I was going to be pregnant or having a baby. I didn't know I would have a child when I was reading those stories in May. And so to see all of these different journeys towards motherhood was very reassuring to be like, okay, well, we're not all out there saying, oh, I'm basking in the glow of motherhood. Like it's hard and it's dirty and it's emotional. And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get talked about that other women want to know, like, is this valid? Am I experiencing something that everyone else is experiencing? And so a lot of those feelings I got validated for me, and I hope got validated for people who also read those stories.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like such a, cause I feel like I'm glad that your site exists and you do this stuff, because I feel like, especially with social media, there's a lot of, look how great it is. Like even talking about motherhood specifically. Oh, look how I got fit so quickly after the baby. And look at how awesome we're going on a sleigh ride. It's so fun.
Yeah.
And it's all these like really positive, really happy things. And it's not always like that. And people, I think, get scared.
Behind it, your baby's having a meltdown. Or like, you haven't slept in 6 days or something. Right. It's not what it seems. And so to have people get really raw and vulnerable about those stories and those experiences is what I love about this site. And it's not, we don't just talk about like motherhood or pregnancy or whatever. I think a lot of times those are a universal thing for many women. And so I kind of gravitate towards those as my examples, but we have, there's lots of different themes and different, stories for women. Last January, January 2019, we did a Me Too theme. And that one, the thing that surprised me most about that theme was that we got stories from women all over the world. So I think we had somebody we had one person in the US, one person in Australia, someone somewhere in Central America, I think, and then someone in Canada, but all the stories had such a similar line. And so it just showed like how prevalent all of this is in our society and how prevalent, stuff like Me Too is. And so harassment, abuse, whatever.
Mhm.
The thing that surprised me about that is the stories were all so similar from so many different parts of the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's easy to sort of to discount like how much courage it takes to write stories like that and like to submit your own personal,
Yes,
because there's nowhere to hide, it's like, this is it. This is how it is for me. And that's a really scary thing, I think.
it is. We talk about getting vulnerable and talk about healing through storytelling, because I am a big believer that the more you tell your story, the more you get to know yourself, the more you get to understand yourself, and the more you heal from whatever past traumas you have, because you're naming them, you're putting them out there, and you're letting yourself kind of let them go in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think writing through trauma or writing through things that have happened to you is really important to understand them and kind of let them go in a way.
Yeah, I feel like it can feel sort of locked up in your mind a lot of the time and get worse and worse, for sure. That sort of segues perfectly into your work at, is it Thistle Farms? Is that what it's called?
Thistle Farms, yeah.
And that's where you sort of started this movement and website, right?
Yeah. So I went to divinity school, I got my master's in theology, and we had two options for my specific program. We could either write a thesis or we could spend a year working in some kind of nonprofit or field study program. And I chose field study because I, at the time, thought that I was going to go into nonprofit work. And I've done nonprofit work since then, but that was kind of my goal with my degree, was to go into nonprofit work. And so Thistle Farms works with women who have survived trafficking, addiction, life on the street. And they are a social enterprise. And so the women who work there they've either come out of prison or halfway homes or whatever, and they are working to make natural bath and body products, and then they sell them. There's also a cafe there that the women can work in. And then it's also I don't want to say rehabilitation, but it kind of is. They live in houses together. The house is called the Magdalene House, and they live in this community, and their kind of founding principle is love heals. And they work really hard to just live in a community of love and forgiveness and kind of come to terms with what has happened to them, to love, not necessarily love the people who hurt them, but to learn to love themselves, because they spent so many years, being pushed around by society, by the men who were using them, by the prison system. And so they talk about making products for your body, to love your body, love yourself. And within that community, then they have a lot of other classes and programs to help women kind of get back on their feet. The women all work there, so they learn job skills and stuff like that. And so I worked there for an entire year. And one of the things that was required for my field study was to create some sort of program that I could do with some of the women. And so they gave me all kinds of different options. They said, "Oh, you could teach a yoga class." And I said, I don't know how to teach yoga. And I didn't really know what I could do. And I said, well, I really enjoy writing. And I took a creative writing class once in college. And so I created this basically creative writing class that I could do with some of the women. And I was pleasantly surprised, because I honestly thought like 2 women would show up and that would be that. But it turned into, I did it at one of the houses, and the living room was full. And what I had planned and kind of what I planned out was for us to, have some writing prompts, write some short stories, whatever else. But what I didn't take into consideration was a lot of these women hadn't finished high school, sometimes grade school. A lot of them had like 6th, 7th grade educations, because they had really rough lives. And so where I was in being able to put together a story or put together whatever else wasn't where they were. And so when I would give a writing prompt, and I thought about, okay, write a fiction story. Like no one really did. They all wrote about themselves, and they all wrote about their healing, or they wrote about what happened to them. They turned those writing prompts into things for themselves. And a lot of them ended up writing poems, which I didn't expect either, because I'm not a poet, and that just never crossed my mind. So it turned in, I kind of had to tweak the class, and it turned into writing about what had happened to them, and writing to heal. So writing out their story so they could finally get it out on paper and kind of see and face what had happened to them in the world. And I wrote along with them, because a lot of times I would be sitting in there with them, and I didn't want to just sit and twiddle my thumbs. So I wrote along with some of the prompts and just wrote about stuff that had happened to me in my life and how I grew up. And I learned a lot of stuff about myself. And I thought, gosh, if this is happening for these women and for myself, I bet a lot of women want to write their stories. And so that's where the idea for the blog kind of came in. And I created it. And then I, like I said, begged a bunch of friends to write for me or tell people about it so I would have content for it. And then I made social media for it, and just kind of went hard, asking for people to write. And it took a while before people started, finding us and sending us stories. And I also didn't know anything about the literary magazine world at the time, and didn't think that's what I was creating, but I did it in a backwards way, because I didn't know I was creating it. And so once I started finding those communities and finding groups of people who wanted to submit stories, it grew and grew and grew. So we became an LLC in December of 2018, so we could finally start to monetize a little bit. So we've been kind of steadily growing since then. It's still very small, but
I mean, I think it's like really, really cool what you're doing. And I think it's super awesome. When you first started, like when you were initially writing those stories and all the other women were writing their stories too, was there like sort of any like visceral emotional reactions to like stuff they were writing? Cause I'm sure like some of the stuff they haven't really thought about, or maybe you haven't either, for a while.
Yeah, it was so interesting how I was surprised at how vulnerable those women were willing to get. Talking about, so these were women who had gone through a lot. They've gone through things that I will never experience, and probably the vast majority of people who are writing for HerStry have never experienced. But some of these women had been sold into prostitution by their mothers at the age of like 12. And they talked about, being beaten with the butts of guns, or things that happened to them in prison, or how they learned at a young age to survive on the street. So they were really intense things. And I was so amazed by their willingness to open up about those things and to share about those things. And part of it was the program that they were in really did a lot of therapy and really encouraged that kind of sharing and healing. So I think this was just one more step of like writing out your story is something that's going to heal you, because you're going to see it. And having something in your head and then putting it on paper they're two different parts of your brain. And so when you write it down, you kind of expel a lot of things that you didn't know were happening, and you put them in order in a way that your brain kind of couldn't, and you sort of silence that chaos. So I was really just so enthralled by the women who just shared these really deep parts of themselves. And I kept quiet a lot of the time about things I was writing, because again, I didn't have those traumas and those things weren't happening to me. And so in comparison, the things I was writing about weren't as important. Well, they were important, but they weren't what we needed to be focusing on. And so I more was just doing it as a way to like, I don't want to sit here and stare at you while you write.
Right.
But it got my wheels turning of like, wow, I'm learning a lot of things about myself that I didn't realize. I bet a lot of other women have these same thoughts, and maybe this could help them too. So my first instinct had been to turn it into some sort of nonprofit, because that's what I was in school for. And I kept thinking, I'll turn this into a nonprofit. We'll do like writing and some kind of like, I didn't know if I would turn it into something that looked like Thistle Farms or whatever else. But that soon became clear that that's not kind of what I wanted to do. But those were my first initial thoughts about like how I could make this my career in some way.
Given all these, like of all the conversations that we're having now around like inequality and equity and stuff, I mean, these aren't new things and new topics that are coming up. Things have been, not good for a while. Yeah. How do you feel like your website fits in all of that? And like, I'm super glad that someone like you is doing this now, especially because I feel like it's more than necessary for sure.
Yeah, I think women's stories are really necessary. We do have a failing, and I readily admit it, that we trend very white and very middle-aged. And I'm trying really hard to fix that. And I'm trying really hard to make this a space where everyone feels comfortable sharing their story, because that's what I want it to be. I want it to be a space for all women. And so we have a diversity issue, I guess, that I'm trying to fix the best that I can, because I want to share lots of different stories. And I don't know if that has to do with where we're putting, like who's finding our submissions online and where we need to be putting those, what kind of data we need to be putting out there for other people to find us. Because we know that those writers are out there, and we want to find them.
Yeah. When you get submissions from like other countries, do you ever ask like how they find you? Like,
I haven't, and I should. A lot of times. So it's interesting. Facebook has really been a great way to find writers, because Facebook groups are a big thing, and there are a lot of submission groups on Facebook. And so often when we have open submissions, we'll share into all of those submission groups. And I think part of the worldwide writers come from that. There's just so many people in those groups. And then also Submittable, which is the platform we use to collect submissions, that is used all over the world. And our stuff will often end up in their newsletter or whatever else. And so a lot of people find us on there. I'm trying to find ways to get us more diverse, because I don't think that some of those groups are as diverse as they could be. So I'm looking for like, what other groups do I need to be in that I don't know exist yet? Yeah. Where I can put our name out there.
When this transitioned to your full-time job, how did that go for you? Like, were you nervous at all, like putting all your eggs in this basket, or were you just kind of like, let's see how this goes?
I was kind of nervous. It was actually, so I was working at a nonprofit in Milwaukee, and I had only been working there April, May, June, July, 7 months, I think. And I hated it. I just hated it. I was so miserable. I would cry some mornings before I went to work.
Wow.
And then I got pregnant, and the nonprofit that I was working for had really terrible insurance. And I didn't have any maternity leave, and I would have had to pay a lot of money to be pregnant. And so my partner and I are not married, but we discovered that I could get on his insurance, and he has really good insurance. And so part of it was we kind of said to each other, it's kind of now or never. Like, why don't I just take this step and see what I can do? I can get on his insurance. I can still be insured and be pregnant, and, try to make this work as best that I can. And at the time I had not started doing online writing groups. I hadn't started the editing services. I kept saying, I know that if I had more time, I could do more things with HerStry. I know that if I had more time, because I would work on it. I also had a part-time job because I wasn't making that much money at this nonprofit. So I was working probably 50 hours a week, and then coming home and working on HerStry at night and on weekends. And I was so burnt out. And so tired, which part of that, then I found out I was pregnant, and that kind of accounted for the tiredness. But I knew it wasn't going to be sustainable, and I was so unhappy with where I was working. So I just sort of made that decision. And so far, we've been okay, and it has worked out. I did just pick up some part-time work as the director of operations for the Wisconsin Writers Association. But again, it's working from home, it's part-time. And so it enables me to kind of work on her story, do that work. And also because of the world we're living in, I'm now our son's full-time caregiver because I'm terrified to send him to daycare or get a babysitter. So
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So I guess this might be a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Why did you take out the O in her story?
So her story with the O is copyrighted by someone else. So
simple answer.
I couldn't use it. So, and the website was always HerStry, because that URL was used by someone else, when I went to buy the domain name. So I just thought, well, I'll just name everything. Because originally it was Her Story with an O, and it was just kind of a play on the word history. But I literally just had to change it because it was copyrighted.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Do they still have it?
I don't know. It was funny because it was somebody in Tennessee, and this is when I was living in Tennessee, and the company I was living in Nashville, and the company was in Murfreesboro, which is a suburb of Nashville. Oh. So but I don't know who it was.
Wow. Yeah. That's a bummer.
Yeah, it was.
You know what? It's really annoying because I have a bunch of domains that I buy. It's annoying when you go to like the domain that you want and it's not even used. Yeah.
I can't find the actual website, but someone owns the name of it. So
yeah, it's ridiculous. And so with all these submissions, do you ever? And you might have before. Have you ever like done like an actual like hard cover book or something like that with the submissions?
So it's funny you say that because we took submissions specifically for a hardcover book, an anthology that we were going to make called Beginnings. And all of the stories that people wrote were themed around the word beginning in some way. And we got all the submissions, we paid the writers, and it just turned into this headache of it was going to cost so much money. And we already sell some things on our website, and our store that is not where any of our profit comes from. And we made journals and they didn't really sell that well. And we have a few other things that haven't sold that well. And I just knew that if we kept going with it, that it was not going to sell. And we were going to end up out the door of a lot of money and no profit. And so I released all of the writers from their contracts and I paid them what we owed them. And then said, you're free to submit anywhere else. I'm really sorry this happened. And everyone was really understanding about it. But maybe someday down the road, we will release a hardcover book. But it's really hard. And especially like if you're like self-publishing it, which is what we were going to do. We were just going to use Amazon Publish. And I'm not really a proponent of self-publishing things. So maybe someday we'll like query an agent and get an editor and like try to actually publish like an anthology of some of the like really great stories we have on the site already, and get it at a larger distribution or something, because as of right now, it was so cost prohibitive that we just couldn't do it.
Yeah. It seems like one of those markets that like, you have to be like 100% sure that these are all going to sell really quickly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and with Kindle and like all this digital stuff, it becomes even more tough.
Yeah. Too. Yeah. And I was like, no one's like, we are not that well known enough for people to want to be grabbing our books off the shelves.
So like you guys talking about that book, but beyond that book, are there stories that still like stick with you today, like that you can recall and remember that have been submitted? Like any really impactful ones that you remember? Yeah,
there were a couple. There was one, I think it's called My Grandmother's God. And it published in January of 2019. And it, to this day, I think is one of the most beautiful stories we have on the site. And it is this woman's journey with herself and her grandmother and her mother, and coming to terms with like her own, her faith and her relationship with her mother and her grandmother. And her writing was just really, really beautiful. And that's one of the reasons it sticks out to me, is she just had this beautiful way of writing and putting things into words. And there was another woman who wrote a piece called my high school health class didn't teach me about rape, or something like that. And it was basically about what school doesn't teach you about sexual assault or even like sexual education. And so that one really stuck out to me. And I'm trying to think, we actually just published one last Wednesday called Losing Rosebud, the Memoir of a Miscarriage. And it was this woman's story about her miscarriage. And again, the way that she wrote it, she is just a really extraordinary writer. And so a lot of stories that sometimes stick out to me are the stories that are so well written, and women have they really have a way of putting their stories into great words. And I'm a sucker for a really well written story. So
yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Like, I think the work that you're doing is so important. And so where can people, if they are interested in submitting stories or just checking out, do you have all the stories that have ever been written on your site still?
Yes, okay. Everything. We have a whole archive.
Okay. Where can people find that stuff?
So our website is HerStryBLG.com, because we used to be a blog, and if anyone knows how to take the BLG out of there, let me know. But so it's HerStryBLG.com, and there is a space up top that says submit a story, and you click on that and you can see all the guidelines for how to submit a story. We do pay for some of our stories. So our monthly themes, we pay writers $20 if their story is accepted, and we only accept 5 stories per theme. So we end up declining a lot more than we accept, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast. Mm-hmm. And then we do have a space for stories that don't have a theme. So a lot of people will just like this, the story we published on Wednesday about the memoir of a miscarriage. That she submitted to our no theme. She had the story that she had written about her miscarriage and wanted a place to submit it. The week before, we published a story from a woman who used to be a professional dominatrix. And so again, we didn't have a theme for that, but she wanted to submit that story. And it was so well written and so intriguing that we published that as a no theme story as well. And those we don't pay for, we don't pay. It is my goal that we get everyone paid. We have to make enough income first to be able to pay everyone. Because we up until this year, we never paid writers, which I hated. Because I really writing is an intensive amount of work, and a lot of literary magazines do not pay. And it's partly because they don't make the money to be able to pay the writers. It's such an unfair beast. And so I really wanted to work up to how can we pay writers? And $20 is not nearly enough, but it's what we can do right now. And hopefully we'll be able to pay everyone $20 soon and then work up from there. So there's a space to submit a story. There's all the different options on there. And then you can read through all of our old stories on the site if you just click on stories, or if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can click on archive and you can go through by year. And you'll see that we also used to publish poetry. And at the very beginning, we published fiction. And we don't do either of those anymore because we got popular enough that we had enough content that we didn't need to have anything else. But you can still read all of those stories.
That's awesome. And what do you have social media, I'm assuming, correct?
We do. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at HerStryBLG, and on Facebook, it's just HerStry. So
yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Once again, I think what you do is like so awesome and necessary, and I am a fan. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And just give your website one more time.
It's HerStryBLG.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.